Good evening and welcome to a new edition of To The Point. This evening we'll be discussing the region, what is surfacing, Egyptian foreign relations, amongst so many other issues. With us this evening is His Excellency Ambassador Mohamed Shazly, who's former Assistant Foreign Minister. A pleasure to have you with us.
The pleasure is all mine, thank you.
Lots of files that are opening right now, and maybe let us talk about the election file. And for us in the region, maybe one of the most concerning files would be the Israeli elections. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's long-serving prime minister, is having quite a tough race. It's a close race. People are concerned in the region by his campaign promise, and I'm quoting here. He said that he will apply Israeli sovereignty in the Jordan Valley. Which means, if we reflect it into a plan of action, that he will be annexing 30%, if not more, of the West Bank, for example. Is there a reason for concern? His counterpart has not made any reference towards what he's planning to do with Israeli settlements or what have you, but Netanyahu has been very clear-cut. He is planning to further take more occupied land.
Let me tell you something. My concern is our attitude. For a very long time, I have been following Israeli elections and American elections.
Yes.
Every time, we are qualifying, would this candidate be better for our cause, or would this candidate be better for our cause? Our cause will not be solved by Netanyahu if he wins, or by his opponent if he wins. It is a matter of balances of power. The Arab balance of power has been depleted to a very sorrowful degree. The main Arab confrontation countries, as we used to call them, were Egypt, Iraq, and Syria. Iraq and Syria are demolished. They no longer count in the balance of power vis-a-vis Israel. Egypt is holding its place. The strife, Arab strife, is depleting our force further. What is happening in Yemen, what is happening in Libya, what is happening in Lebanon. So all of this, I mean, it is, I'm not, putting my stakes on who will win the elections. The United States, who is balancing the equation in the Middle East to a large extent, has went 100% to the Israeli side. They have recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. They have moved their embassy to Israel. They are standing by passively at the declarations of the Israelis. I think Mr. Trump has already agreed to the annexation of the settlements. So this is an issue of international legality. The status of Jerusalem, the status of the occupied lands, is not to be determined by Mr. Netanyahu. There are several Security Council resolutions
that said it's
this is the
violating international law.
This is international law. Are we opting to live in a world of lawlessness, or are we opting to? This is I put this to the international community. I'm not putting us to Egypt or to Israel or to whatever, or to the United States. I'm putting it to the international community. Are we opting to a world governed by the barrel of the gun, lawlessness, or are we opting to a civilized world where international law is supreme?
So basically you're saying it doesn't make a difference who is in office? Because you think the same policy
the same policy. I mean, Mr. Netanyahu has created an atmosphere of chauvinism in Israel that is very difficult for, even if his opponent wins, it is very difficult for him to stand against this current.
What he is promising out loud to his constituency, do you think this is music to their ears, or a cause of concern and might not get him re-elected for the 6th term, I believe, in office? Since he's very blunt about it, unlike his counterpart.
This is unfortunately the atmosphere that is all over the international arena. Mr. Trump stands up and says, you know, America first. Netanyahu stands up and says, Israel first. Even India, you know, the secular regime that has driven India to what it has become today, that India, you know, a couple of weeks ago, they have sent a spaceship to the moon. I mean, they have achieved tremendous achievements under the secular regime. Now you have a Hindu fanatic who is annexed Kashmir and is putting the whole sub-Indian continent in jeopardy. So this is, you know, a prevalent atmosphere in the international arena now, unfortunately.
The role of the international organizations to confront violations of international law. What can be done to ensure that the rule of law is applied, especially when you see certain countries are refusing to adhere to any rules and superpowers supporting the law of the jungle?
Unfortunately, you know, you cannot talk about the international organizations without actually knowing the mechanism of how they work. You know, the United Nations, for instance, it is governed by the Security Council. You have the veto, right of veto there. And you have a declaration in the Security Council which is vetoed by one of the 5 members. And then it goes to the General Assembly, which does not have enforcing powers.
Yes.
It is passed by 190 votes. So this shows you that the Security Council does not represent the international community. There have been, you know, efforts to reorganize the United Nations, and saying that some countries that have reached a level of development and power should be admitted as permanent members. Like, for instance, India, and in Africa there was a struggle between Egypt, Nigeria, and South Africa. In South America, Brazil and Argentina. I don't think this is the proper way to remedy the wrongs. If you have other permanent members, this exacerbates the problem. What I see that should be done in the United Nations is that if we cannot abolish the veto, we can at least try to minimize its efforts. To say, for instance, if 2/3 in the General Assembly agree to something, it cannot be vetoed by one vote in the Security Council. This is how you can change.
Who changes this? Whose role is it to?
The international community.
Call for it.
Unfortunately, the system of the United Nations, which gives the veto power to just 5 countries, the victors of the Second World War, which has ended, 70 years ago?
Yes.
The whole international arena has changed. At the time when the Charter of the United Nations was drawn, India was an occupied country. China was devastated by civil war. So You cannot, Germany was a destroyed country, Japan was a destroyed country. The whole arena is changed now. You have India is a great power, Japan is a great power, Germany is a great power, Brazil is a great power, and so on. So you have to revise this system that is driving the world into catastrophe.
Netanyahu's rival in the race, so to speak, for the premier, said that he plans to change the direction of the ship of Israeli democracy. What do you think he's talking about? What do you mean by change the direction?
I mean, democracy is democracy. I mean, when you speak about Israeli democracy, I think this is a travesty of expression. You cannot have a democracy when you say this is a Jewish country. You know, the whole world reacted to, you know, Islamic countries. Why is the world silent about a Jewish country?
Is he planning to change that? Because evidently this is Netanyahu's image, Netanyahu's plan. Do you think he will be changing that? When he says, I'm changing the direction of the ship.
How will he change it? I mean, into what direction? What does he mean? If changing the direction, give the Palestinians the right. Live in peace in the Middle East. You know, in the 50s and 60s, there was a complete rejection of Israel in the Middle East and amongst the Arab countries. Today, you know, I mean, everybody, I mean, they have signed peace treaties with Egypt and with the Jordan. There was a Arab-Israeli peace plan presented by Saudi Arabia. There are visits and exchanges between several Arab countries and Israel. Nobody is against the existence of Israel. But everybody is against what Israel wants in the Middle East. Israel does not want to be a country in the Middle East. It wants to have hegemony over the whole.
It wants to be the only country.
It wants to be the only country.
The situation in Tunisia and the elections.
This is something we can smile upon. I mean, this is the second democratic election that has happened in Tunisia in the last 5 years. The outcome is surprising to everybody. The whole powers of politics have been eclipsed by the two emerging names. What is also very promising is that nobody accused nobody else of rigging the elections or of which
very civilized conduct.
A very civilized. I mean, this gives me hope that this is an emerging democracy. They have rejected the old regime. They have rejected the ideological Islam in power. They have voted for a secular professor of constitutional law. A man who has been campaigning from prison has turned out in the second place. So this is a very positive, very positive. You know, this is something you can really smile upon in an atmosphere that is rather grim.
How will it reflect on neighboring countries that are following certain religious ideologies in their elections?
I mean, in neighboring countries, when we speak of neighbors of Tunisia, we are speaking about Libya. It is futile to talk about elections in Libya at the moment, where people are killing one another and fighting one another. In Algeria, I think, I hope that this will reflect, because, you know, Algeria had a very serious problem there, and had an undeclared civil war that claimed the lives of tens of thousands. So I hope, you know, if you look all around, you will find that, you know, the politicization of Islam is breaking down. You found what has happened in Sudan, they revolted against an Islamic regime, what has happened in Tunisia. There are, voices, reasonable voices talking in Algeria. So all of this is promising. It needs an effort. It needs awareness of the public. It needs a very diligent and active media to make the people aware of democracy and of good governance.
Some people are concerned about a war looming in southern Sudan. A peace accord was drafted over a year ago and nothing has materialized thus far. Are we heading in a bad direction in the south?
Well, let me also, are you talking about South Sudan in particular or Sudan?
No, I'm talking about South Sudan, and how will this reflect? Because it's
South Sudan is a deplorable case in the sense that they seceded from Sudan under the banner of that we will not be ruled by a racist regime. They look upon themselves as Arabs and we are Africans. They seceded under the banner of they are an Islamist and we are not Muslims. Once they seceded, one would have accepted that they would have a just regime. That we had very flagrant racism by the ruling Dinka tribe. And then the amount of mismanagement and corruption. South Sudan, the amount of money that was given by the international, the European Union, the United States, some Arab countries, it was enormous. Nothing was built. They started destroying one another and started fighting in between themselves.
Yes.
Between Riek Machar's group and Salva Kiir's group. And everybody started to mobilize the tribal affinities, which is also deplorable. I believe, that the stability in the north, in Sudan proper, will have its positive influence on the south.
Will we see a further subdivision in the south? People are concerned that not only north-south, but you might find further division.
I doubt it in the south. Between north and south, it was, geographically clear. You have the north, the Arab north, and the African south. In the south, there are several tribes, and they are not confined to geographical locations. And in many cases, they intermingle at the same area. So I don't think that the scenario of the north-south would apply to South Sudan.
Another concerning development is tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and how the U.S. is fitting into that equation after the latest attacks on Saudi oil. Is there a war looming? What is taking place?
I think, we should be very, very careful in handling this issue. What happened is that a couple of days ago, drones targeted installations of oil in the Aramco company and destroyed several sites.
Yes.
There are allegations. Some people say that the Houthis from Yemen launched them. Some people
Yemenis.
say that it's Iranian and so on. The United States came up and said, no, we have information that it has come from Iran. And this is a deplorable situation, because what is happening in our backyard, we don't have data on what is happening. You know, the United States is monitoring through its satellites. Israel is monitoring through its satellites. The Europeans are monitoring through their satellites, and we are blindfolded. We do not know what is happening in our backyard.
Will this be used? There is concern that there is, of course, tension between the US and Iran, and this will be used as a way to hit at Iran. But by us, not by the...
Indeed.
Will be used as a weapon.
I mean, this is the grand plan of what is happening. They are trying, first of all, you know, Mr. Trump has his grand design on the Middle East and solving the Palestinian-Israeli problem by, you know, diverting the animosity of the Arabs from Israel to Iran. I don't think that this is in the interest of the Arabs. If you a war with Iran is going to be a very destructive. I mean, we have experienced an Arab-Iranian war between Iraq and Iran.
Yes.
And several of the Arab countries were also involved in financing and the Iraqi war effort. And
something which we can't afford.
It lasted for 10 years. It has depleted the powers of Iran and the powers of Iraq, and ended with the occupation of and the destruction, complete destruction of Iraq. We don't want this scenario to be dictated on us once more. The whole issue, you know, started with, I think, the quixotic and meaningless war that is going on in Yemen. If we have the capability of sitting and talking with Israel, I think we should have the capability of sitting and talking with Arab parties in Yemen.
Are we ready? In other words, it seems that we're all very flammable, easily flammable. I mean, one thing happens and then we just all burst into flames. I mean, you see very tough statements by Saudi officials vis-a-vis this incident. You see the US pointing a finger at Iran. Are we going to be cornered into a war in our backyard?
I hope, you know, what makes wisdom is benefiting from previous experiences. We have the experience of the United States pointing a finger at Saddam Hussein. He's amassing weapons of mass destruction, and so let us go and destroy Iraq. And they destroyed Iraq, and then everybody now is saying that there were no weapons of mass destructions. As I told you, that now the United States is pointing to Iran and saying that these drones were launched from Iran, and we have no idea. We have to review the whole power of the world today. Is the power of information.
Which is used to manipulate.
Which is used to manipulate. I mean, if you don't have your own sources, if you don't have... Israel has, I think, about 8 satellites in outer space, you know, seeing everything that is done. You know, the 5th stage of the information, what they call, I think, the G5, I think, it makes the holder of this technology able to listen to every mobile phone call in a certain area.
Yes.
So if we are away from this technology, if we are away, I mean, instead of, you know, our spending on, I think in many cases, you know, the Arab investments are in trivia. If we don't invest in technology, in high technology, which will enable us. As I was telling you now, India has sent a spacecraft which landed or crashed or whatever, but it has reached the moon.
Yes.
It has another spacecraft orbiting Mars. And India in 1945 was an occupied country.
Yes.
I mean, Egypt, for instance, was much more advanced than India in that time. Look at where their investment in technology has sent them.
Yes.
And we are still
Prioritizing.
Prioritizing.
How do you see this region developing? In other words, I know I've asked this question a lot, but we have a lot of some positive notes, which is maybe the fact that we are starting to fully understand that the alleged religious ideologies are not really the best tools to govern. More people are realizing that this is a facade, so to speak. But there are lots of boiling points here. And as you were saying, whenever we try to concentrate on the Palestinian question, which is really one of the main factors of balancing not only power, but achieving sustainable peace in the region, we're always shifting somewhere else. We have numerous boiling points. I mean, look at us in Egypt, for example. Our southern borders, there are issues in Sudan. You have your borders with Libya, there are issues. You have your borders with the Palestinian occupied territories, you have issues. I mean, there's a situation in Syria, a situation in Yemen. It's never ending. Where are we heading? Because it doesn't seem, are we learning from history? Are we recognizing that we have to work together?
Let me tell you, I am a keen believer that you cannot have national security without regional security.
Where is regional?
This is where we should start our efforts. Look at Europe. I mean, until the end of World War II, the amount of horrendous wars you had, the 30 Years' War, it killed 10% of the population of Europe. Then you had the Napoleonic Wars, you had the First World War, you had the Second World War, and so on. Once you established the European Union, and once you established a regional security, every country had its national security stable. So, I mean, we cannot talk of the security of Egypt while there is a configuration in Libya and in Sudan and in Syria and in Iraq and in Lebanon and so on. If we don't have a regional peace in the area, nobody is going to be safe. And this needs also awareness of the people. As you have put it very eloquently, prioritizing, giving priorities to issues. This needs, first of all, a national strategy. It needs awareness of the masses. It needs media, the role of the media, the role of the political parties, and so on. So it is a package deal. You cannot achieve it.
But how can you do this package deal when you have some parties that are unwilling? I mean, for years now, Egypt, for example, has been calling out loud for need to consolidate efforts to confront and combat terrorism, to stand up to those countries that are supporting terrorist groups, to actually agree on who are the terrorist groups. Yet, even within this region, we're not agreeing, let alone at a larger international scale.
Yeah, this is, the crux of the problem. I think in the late 80s or early 90s, I cannot recollect, at the time, Egypt called for an international conference to define terrorism. What is terrorism is a terrible phenomenon that is plaguing the world today.
It has no borders.
It has hit everywhere, in South America, in the United States, in New Zealand, in Europe, in Japan. in India. The problem is that the issue has been politicized. I mean, what is terrorism? For me, I mean, any armed action against civilians who are non-combatants, who are women, children, elderly people, young people who are not carrying arms, is an act of terrorism. However noble the aim is, I mean,
there is no aim that can justify.
I do not question the nobility of our efforts to liberate
The end does not justify means.
And Al-Aqsa Mosque. But I cannot see this being achieved by assassinating Yusuf al-Sibai or Nagi al-Ali, whatever. So you have to have, or by blowing up an aircraft in Lockerbie. So this is what is happening today. If you look at what is happening in Syria, the United States is backing some armed groups and saying that these are freedom fighters, and the Russians are backing another group, and these are committing atrocities. I mean, you cannot politicize the issue.
Yes.
It is, I think, the issue of terrorism is very clear. Nobody who is objective and has a real conscience can disagree with this. Anybody who carries arms to terrorize or to kill or to maim or to destroy innocent people is a terrorist, whatever his aim is.
The challenges for us as Egypt in our foreign policy. We're almost finishing a year. What are the challenges that we need to overcome to ensure we're on the right track? And when I say challenges in Egypt's foreign policy, unfortunately, it's not just Egypt, because the situation around you affects you.
I think, my priority, in my point of view, in Egypt's foreign policy is, the international arena is a tough place. You cannot be there alone. The United States, which is the strongest military force and the strongest industrial force and the strongest political force in the world, needs to ally itself with Belgium and with Italy in NATO in order to be able to face the challenge on the international arena. You cannot ask Egypt to stand alone and face NATO and face Israel and face Turkey and face whoever alone. My priority for Egypt is to make a consolidated, common front with the Arab world, with the Africans, in order to have weight on the international arena. The problem with the Arabs is that, the Qataris think that they can manipulate the whole world alone. The Emiratis think the same, and so on. You had Muammar al-Qaddafi, who thought that he's going to shape the world upon his own vision. Saddam Hussein led not only Iraq but the whole Arabs into tragedy by working alone. So I think our golden years, at least on the international arena, were the 50s, from the mid-50s to the mid-60s, when we had the non-aligned movement. We had by our side India, we had by our side China, we had by our side Yugoslavia, we had the African world with us, the Arab world. This is how you can face. I mean, don't ask Egypt to face NATO alone. Don't ask Egypt to face the big powers alone. If we are not able to form an integrated, united front, I think the result for all of us is going to be pitiful.
When you say if we're not capable, do we have the political will? Because if you have the political will, you can do whatever you want. Judging by events, even since the so-called Arab Spring, let's talk about the past few years and how things have changed and evolved, not only at the leadership level, but even at the people's level. the awareness, the priorities, the events. Do you see that a political will to consolidate efforts has surfaced?
Let me tell you something. You know, you have also said something very eloquently at the people's level. This is the most important. If you look at Egypt's modern history, what do you find? You find a great man like Muhammad Ali. He built modern Egypt, he built an Egyptian empire, he built an army, he built an economy, industry, and so on. Muhammad Ali died, and then came his son Abbas. He destroyed all what his father did. Saeed came, and there was a little bit of change, and then Ismail, who built also some things, and then Tawfiq came and destroyed everything that his father did. And then you had the glorious 1919 revolution. On the political side,
Yes.
it made democracy, it built an Egypt of constitutions, of institutions.
Yes.
And then it was destroyed, and 1952 came and nearly erased the achievements of 1919. 1952 revolution and Gamal Abdel Nasser have done some great things, building an industry, building a foreign policy that was. And then came Sadat, and he took another direction. So, I mean, you are talking about somebody who wants to build a skyscraper. He builds 2 stories and then he destroys them and starts building again. You will never achieve more than the 3 stories. If you have an institution, if you have popular awareness, they will not allow this to happen. The countries are built by, you know, I always give the example of John Kennedy when he stood in front of Congress in 1961 and said, by the end of the decade, we are going to send a man to the moon and bring him back safely to Earth.
Yes.
He was assassinated in 1963. And yet, in 1969, they sent a man. Why? Because there was an institution. There was NASA. There were the Congress and the Senate. It's not a one-man job.
Yeah.
So we have to build awareness, and this where the media comes in, because where the political infrastructure is political parties, freedom of expression, freedom of political work. This is what creates, in the Arab world, you know, there is...
Which media? Because if we look at media worldwide and even in this region, we are not all talking the same language. And when I mean we're not speaking the same language, it's not a matter of that we're all in Arabic, for example, or in English. Or
No, we're not.
Media is
addressing the same issues.
Reflecting policies. Let's be quite frank. And since policies in different countries differ, thus the tone of the media, the agenda of the media will differ. How can we expect media to bridge the gap when it is subdivided in itself?
In all the world, media does not speak with one tongue. You know, in the United States, I think there are 2,000 newspapers.
And they have different agendas.
And some of them are what we call yellow newspapers and sensationalists. But you have cornerstones of the media. You have the Washington Post, you have the Wall Street Journal, you have the New York Times.
Los Angeles Times.
These are the issue of the media. These are the platforms that have credibility. So, I mean, some people read, you know, the yellow media and the sensationalist media for fun. But what forms the political mentality are the cornerstones. You know, in Egypt, we had cornerstones. Unfortunately, they are challenged today. And what is even graver is the social media. I mean, there is absolutely no control.
No, you cannot control social
No,
media.
no,
It
no.
has no value.
Everything can be controlled. I don't mean by control that if somebody says something you don't like, put him in jail. No. But if you have a credible source, a respected source, nobody will try to contradict it. Let me tell you an anecdote. A Tunisian ambassador told me that once. That once, you know, the Al-Ahram wrote attacking President Bourguiba. So they asked the Egyptian ambassador to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to complain and said, you know, this is a head of state, you cannot.
Yes.
So the ambassador did his homework and he took with him a Tunisian paper which was attacking severely Gamal Abdel Nasser and said, I mean, you've been... So, you know, the Tunisian official said, come on, I mean, this newspaper is read by 1,000 Tunisians, but the Al-Ahram is read from the Gulf to...
The outreach is large.
So
Yes.
this is what I mean by a media that has its credibility and has its weight with the public.
Your Excellency, unfortunately, I have a minute or so left, but I cannot help but reflect on the fact that when you talk about consolidating efforts in this region, you did not mention the Arab League or the League of Arab States as a tool to bridge the gap.
Well, I'm sorry. You know, the Arab League is a very important tool that is marginalized because, I mean, what is the Arab League? The Arab League reflects the policies and the outlook of the Arab nations. I mean, there is no such thing. There is a building, the Arab League building, but it does not speak. Who speaks are the people inside,
Yes.
the governments. Since there is no consensus between the Arab governments, you will have an Arab League that is marginalized.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your fruitful input. Wish you the very best of luck.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank you, the viewers. We'll see you same time next week. Until then, good night.